Hi. Today we're going to watch a fantasy movie. The Mask. A diver working underwater discovered an ancient treasure chest. But the moment he opened the treasure chest, the steel pipe from the ship fell suddenly. The diver died. An ancient mask was slowly rising to the surface. Stanley is an ordinary bank clerk. At the same time, he is also known as a good man. One day, he was teased again by a girl he liked at work. Good friend Charlie saw it, let Stanley change his target, and decided to take him to the hottest nightclubs. At this moment, a stunning beauty suddenly appeared before their eyes. Charlie hurried forward to receive her. The beauty avoids Charlie straight to Stanley. Tease Stanley. This left Stanley a little flustered. What he didn't know was that the beautiful woman, Dinah, was actually a member of a criminal gang. She had come to see what was going on inside the bank. After work, Stanley came to the garage to pick up the car, but the shady boss tried to blackmail Stanley. The boss is going to force the car to change its braking system. Stanley was very angry, but dare not break out. He had to drive to the nightclub in the beaten-up old car the dealer gave him. This made Stanley unpopular and despised. After meeting up with a good friend, Charlie paid the doorman, took the girls into the nightclub. But Stanley, who followed, did not know the rules. He was quickly thrown out without a bribe. At a time when Dinah came to the club too and greeted Stanley warmly. But as the doorman brought in the beat-up old car, Stanley felt humiliated. He drove away in frustration. And on the way home, the car broke down again because of a breakdown. Stanley, full of anger, kicked the car. As a result, the car fell apart and was completely scrapped. Stanley had to come helplessly to the bridge to breathe, but then he saw what looked like a man on the river. So he ran into the river at once. Although Stanley soon discovered it was just a bunch of weeds, but he stumbled upon the old mask. The mask glowed a strange green light and Stanley was instantly attracted. But just as he was about to put on his mask, Stanley was interrupted by the sudden appearance of the police. Stanley could only stop hurriedly what he was doing. He said he had found what he had lost. After lying to the police, Stanley returned to his quarters. He wanted to relax himself by watching cartoons, but the rude landlord scolded him for being too noisy. He had to change the channel. At this time, Dr. Newman's views on maskology were being broadcast on television. He believed that most people wore masks to suppress their inner desires, masquerading as social needs. Stanley heard and remembered the mask he had found. Then, driven by curiosity, he took up the mask again. The mask immediately clung to his face. And after a tornado of rapid movement, Stanley turns into a green-faced freak. His behavior at this time is bizarre and exaggerated. An alarm clock popped out of his pocket. Then he smashed the alarm clock with a sledgehammer. He had also punched holes in the walls and floors. When the landlord found out, then the gun was fired at him. Stanley jumped off the building. And then there was a rogue. And as a magician, he creates a machine gun in public. After a shooting spree, the bullies were frightened and scurried away. Stanley, with his powers, feels like a superhero. So he flew back to the garage, punished the boss. When Stanley woke up the next day, he thought it was just a strange dream. But the sheriff's arrival made him realize that everything had really happened the night before. So before I go to work, Stanley threw the mask straight out of the window. But he didn't know, the mask quickly flew back to his room. And at work, Stanley was approached again by a female reporter. Because the owner of the car dealership was punished by Stanley, he immediately called the police. Female journalists looked for clues. That's when I found Stanley. Stanley heard only that he didn't know about it. Stanley sleeps at night with a dream about Dinah. Just as Dinah kissed him, he was licked awake by a puppy. Although Stanley doesn't have the guts to meet Dinah, but instead, he finds the mask he has left behind. Unable to control his inner longing, he then puts on a mask and turns into a green-faced monster. And because Stanley had no money, he decided to go to the bank first and make some money. At this time, Dorian's men are standing guard in front of the bank, ready to rob. Stanley beat him to the draw. Not only did they not get a penny, they were surrounded by the police who followed. Stanley, with money, took a stretch of limousine to the club. Here, he finally saw the sexy beauty of Dinah. Dinah dances let Stanley indulge in. Then he too took on various forms. Stanley then ran off stage in a panic, and successfully performed a wonderful duet with Dinah. After the dance, the wonderful duet with Stanley kisses Dinah again. But then Dorian's men recognized Stanley. He then shot him. At first, Stanley morphs into various shapes, cleverly missed the bullet. That doesn't seem like much, so he pretended to be hit again. Then he performed a silly parting scene. He won an Oscar for Best Actor. And after teasing Dorian, he sped away from the scene again. At this time, the sheriff came with someone and arrested all of Dorian's men. But before they leave, the sheriff finds Stanley's pajamas. So he went to Stanley the next morning. Stanley says his pajamas had been stolen long ago. It's a way of muddling through. On the other side, because the bank's surveillance cameras caught what happened last night, Dorian's men were also acquitted. But Dorian couldn't swallow it. He immediately offered a $50,000 reward for the mask, and on its term Dinah's attitude is very dissatisfied. Stanley was reprimanded again by the governor's son. Stanley did not endure. Instead, he fought back forcefully, to the surprise of both Charlie and himself. At this moment, Dinah comes to the bank and lifted the mask to Stanley. And Dinah saw that he was very fond of the mask. Stanley pretended that the masked geek was his college friend, and promised to meet Dinah in the evening. After that, to find out where the mask came from, Stanley turned to Dr. Newman for help. The doctor guessed that the mask belonged to Loki. Legend has it that Loki was the god of mischief, because he was driven from heaven forever by his heavenly father. At this point, the sheriff finally confirmed by fingerprint comparison Stanley is the bank robber. He then decided to arrest Stanley. But Stanley didn't know. He went to see Dinah first, and watched the sunset with each other. But while Dinah was in the midst of beauty, Stanley was not very confident and that the masked stranger is coming, then ran into the grass to complete the transformation. Dinah, on the other hand, seemed to resent the behavior of the masked stranger, even frightened. At this time, the sheriff who was lying in ambush suddenly appeared. Stanley was arrested. Stanley played a joke on the sheriff. Then he ran away from the park as fast as he could, and locked the gate of the park. After a lot of work, he found himself surrounded by police. And he danced again for an instant. The policeman present seemed bewitched. Then she jumped up with him. Fortunately, the sheriff arrived in time to bring everyone back to normal. Stanley fled into an alley and tore off the mask, while the female reporter suddenly appeared with her help. Stanley managed to escape the scene. After that, Stanley confided all the secrets about the mask to the female reporter and was ashamed of his behavior. The female reporter didn't care. He praised him as a brave and kind man. Stanley was deeply moved. What he didn't expect was that the female reporter had already betrayed her. Turns out the woman reporter just wanted to get Dorian's reward money. He also tricked the mask to Dorian. Dorian did not know the mystery of the mask at first. It wasn't until he put on the mask that he felt the power. Then, Dorian had his men find Stanley's money again. He handed Stanley over to the police, but they didn't know Stanley's dog had chased him all the way to the police station after finding its owner, and looked at the little dog that came running to look for him. Stanley let the dog forget to find a new owner. The dog whimpered and refused to leave. After that, Dinah visits Stanley at the police station. Stanley admits to being the mask freak. He also admitted that masks make your inner desires come true. A man like him would only become a love-struck saint. And Dorian once put on a mask, sure he'll be the devil. Then he worried about Dinah's safety and advised the woman he loved to leave because only Stanley really cared about her, not as a plaything. Dinah also tells Stanley she doesn't like masks, he only loves the man behind the mask. Then Dinah said Dorian is going to the charity dinner tonight, and she would find a place to hide. Get settled in and contact Stanley. Dinah had just left the police station and was followed by Dorian's men. He immediately asked the guards to come to Dinah's rescue. The guards were unaccountable. You want to go to bed? So Stanley had to figure it out for himself. He let the puppy jump on the window first, then he used the dog to steal the guard's keys. After leaving the cell, Stanley robbed the guard of his pistol and stunned the opponent. But then the sheriff showed up. In desperation, Stanley hijacks the sheriff and leaves the station. Then he drove off at a great speed to the charity dinner. At the same time, Dorian could not accept that Dinah had moved on. He then prepared to punish the woman. But before that, he put on his mask first, go to the party as a green monster. Lavish banquets. A lot of big shots came. The mayor was among them. And Dorian bursts in with his hands down, and they quickly took the people hostage. On the other side, Stanley arrived on the scene. He locked the sheriff in his car. He himself sneaked into the party to deal with Dorian. At this time, Dorian has tied Dinah up. Explosives were placed at his feet. But just as Stanley was about to strike, but he was found by the men of Tyrion, and Stanley gets caught. Dinah was very worried. Then she pretended to kiss Dorian goodbye for the last time. The arrogant Dorian thought that Dinah was still in love with him and took off his mask, but then Dinah opened the rope on her feet and kicked the mask off Dorian's hand. The crowd jostled for control only to be caught by Stanley's puppy. The puppy becomes super dog when he wears the mask. It took 2 of Dorian's men in an instant. At this time, Stanley is about to rescue Dinah when Dorian knocks him to the ground. 2 people also immediately fight up. After knocking out Dorian so hard, Stanley took off the dog's mask, and once again become a masked strange guest. Then, he used the giant guns to scare away Dorian's men, then quickly defuse the bomb. Just eat it. The bomb exploded in his stomach, but at this moment, Dorian charged again with a knife. Stanley saw it, then he drew a toilet switch. Just flush the villain away. After all this is done, Stanley took off his mask. The police came, too. The sheriff was going to arrest Stanley, but the mayor said no. Because he saw with his own eyes that the mask was Dorian, and Stanley saves them all. Eventually Stanley decided to throw away the magical mask. Dinah agreed and took the mask and threw it into the river without a care, and in the romantic sunset, Stanley and Dinah lock lips immediately. That's all for today's commentary. If you like my video, don't forget thumb up comments. See you next time.